Sorry.
No, that's okay. We're used to this kind of a thing on the Geezer Show.
Well, I'm an old geezer. That's for sure. I'm 95, still alive.
In a moment, I'm going to introduce a very interesting guest. But right now, I'd like you to join me, and we're pretending we're in a time capsule so we can explore the now, past days, months, and even years. But now let's hurry past the Depression era of the 20s and 30s, and it's December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor, and we are thrust into World War II. Today's guest, Edward W. Wood Jr., was wounded during the conflict in Europe. He is also an award-winning author of 3 outstanding books covering the carnage of war. We'd like to start off with Ed. I know you have history in your family of many who participated in many wars since the Revolution. But what I'd ask you right now is give us a little look into your early life before you volunteered for the service.
Well, I was born in 1924. My father was a very successful businessman in Charlotte, North Carolina until the Great Depression. He had a woods paint and wallpaper company outside of Charlestown town. He lost that. He lost our house. He lost everything. He finally found a job in Chicago, and my mom and my dad drove to Chicago, lived on the south side. I was from a safely protected suburb. I was thrust into an inner city neighborhood. And Dad went ahead, and he was a wonderful salesman, and he got back, and he became I think he became close to a millionaire by the mid-30s until we moved to a suburb of LaGrange. And I had a very safe and really a pleasant boyhood until World War II started. And I was drafted. I was drafted, but I volunteered for the draft. I wanted to be up there and in the front. They put me in college, a program called Army Specialized Training Program. They put me in college, then they put me in a pre-med program. And I volunteered out of that because I didn't believe I should be in a safe billet while my friends were being killed and wounded. Next thing I knew, I had a conflict with an artillery shell, and the artillery shell won. I was hit in the head, my right butt was shaved off, and I still have a piece of shrapnel in my belt. And the wound totally and irrevocably changed my life. It became something it never would have. And for the better in the long run. So I lost many years. I was wounded in 1944, and it was 1959 before I got into MIT, 14 years later. In that time, I had PTSD. I wandered around the nation. I lived in Mexico a year in a village when I and my wife were the only Americans there. I was a gardener. It was a bad time, but I could not get used to the idea what had happened to me. Volunteering out to go to line duty was the formative experience in my life. I was stationed in the state of Washington after I quit the college program. They shipped me to Kansas for 6 weeks training, and then I had a furlough. I went home, and from April to July, I was on my way overseas. At that time, the way they replaced people, they didn't send units up to the front. They sent individuals. That is, say a guy was wounded or killed, where they sent me in to, quote, replace, close quotes, him. And that, I think, is probably one of the loneliest experiences in the world. You go in there, nobody wants to talk to you. You've just replaced a buddy who was killed or wounded. They don't know anything about you. They don't know if you're a coward or if you're a good shot or if you're going to run, you're going to get them into trouble. So they treat you like you have a huge case of poison ivy. And it's a pretty awful experience. What most people don't understand is that 50% of our replacements in World War II were young guys like me, 18 and 19 years old. It was an experience that led to real cynicism and real fear. Meat for the butcher, that was what you were called. The Army was a good experience for me. That's all I can say right now.
You described it in such detail in your book on being wounded. I was really, the description of how you felt and also what happened when you were wounded. And there was something, they were trying to get you back in the ambulance and the mortar shells were still coming down. Was
Yeah.
that it?
Yeah, they were still coming down, and they dropped me. They dropped the stretcher, and I can't blame them. They ran and got in the lead of the ambulance. What's difficult about this country? It's one of the most warlike countries in the world, and yet it has absolutely no understanding of what war is really like. The thing that I have memorized that tells me what war is really like was a poem by Siegfried Sassoon in 1916. He was an officer. He was badly wounded, and he wrote these lines. War was a fiend who stopped our clocks. So we met him, grim and gay. And I think that says it all. You meet him grim and gay, and you're never the same again. What we became, we had no PTSD, we had no psychiatrist. I think we became a generation of secret drunks. On Sunday night, we would straighten ourselves up and go to work Monday through Friday, have a good job, work 10, 12 hours a day, and then come home Friday night and hit the Jack Daniels and they have booze till Sunday night. War is a terrible experience.
When did you decide that you wanted to write about this?
Right after the war, I tried to write, and I even have a copy of the short story I wrote, but it wasn't very good and I couldn't sell it. So I did these other things and eventually got into MIT and became a city planner. And then when I was in my 50s, I would go into coffee shops and they would play World War II music. The song, I Walk Alone with No One to Guide Me. And
I remember that one.
I know that you are lonely too. Broke my heart. And I began to write down ideas and thoughts about World War II. And they slowly evolved into a book. So I got it published. But the thesis of the book is on being wounded and what it does to your life.
Your descriptive language in the novel on being wounded, I can't express how it hit me because you described what was going on around you. But the book itself, as I said before, anybody that wants to see a true interpretation of what a war is really like, I'd say go online and get a copy of On Being Wounded. I tell you, I was crying reading it. It was the horrors and the way you described them. You're an eloquent writer, really. And I'm on your last book, The Myths of World War II. I'm reading that now.
Thank you. Well, I tried to write the truth of war as I saw it and how its impact never ends.
Do you think there's a chance for world peace? Do you think we'll ever be a global population that isn't fighting and that isn't in a war?
I think that the nation and ourselves have become used to spending huge amounts of money on what is called the Defense Department, when actually it's an offense department. What we should be doing is devoting that money to stopping this pandemic. We should be using some of that money for our kids to help them get a decent education while they suffer from the pandemic. We should be using that money to help poor people. At least that's my frank opinion. Since 1975, we've had a professional army. And what democracy is supposed to have a professional army? I mentioned earlier, I served in World War II. I volunteered for the draft. I volunteered out of being sent to college to go to the front. My dad flew in World War I, which means that he volunteered for that. He cracked up once. I have the tip of his old propeller in my living room. My great-great-uncle volunteered for the Union Army, and he got shot. I have great-great-great-great-grandsters who volunteered for the Revolution. I don't know if any of them got wounded or not. But it goes on and on and on. But there's a big difference between having a volunteer army, which rises up when the nation is threatened, does the duty, and says goodbye at the end of it. I don't want to wear that uniform again. And we've dumped that. I've ended up to be a Quaker, a conscientious objector to war. but I realized that sometime wars may have to be fought. And I'm damn glad I was one that had to be fought. Once Hitler came to power in 1933, it was inevitable.
After you were wounded, you came back to the States?
No, I went to the hospital in England for 3 months. Then I came back to the States, and then I was discharged. At that time, as I remember, I may be incorrect, a head wound was automatically discharged. They didn't know much about what happened. What happened to me was when I was wounded, I was hit. You can still see the hole in my head right there.
Oh, wow.
Left parietal region of my skull. And I was paralyzed on the right hand side. I hung there for a long time. I couldn't move my right side until they took the shrapnel and the pieces of helmet out of my brain. And once they took those out, I got well. But I never have been really well. I can't feel anything in my right hand, never, since I was wounded. So many of my friends were wounded, and so many of my high school class were killed. The guy across the street from me was killed flying in October of 1943. I have no regrets. That was my country. It needed me, and I did it. And I'm damn glad I did it.
We used to have our weekly meetings at the VA, and now, because of the epidemic, we only meet online and talk to each other. But as you know, there were guys in our group that were wounded in the wars that followed Vietnam. And you know that they have some of the same feelings that you've expressed here today. I hope that generations after us don't experience it, but I'm sure they will.
If you have any advice, Ed, for younger people.
I guess the advice I would have is not just to younger people, but to the country in general, is look after the weak, the poor, the hurt. Spend money there. We have entirely too many people who are hurt, especially in this pandemic. Thank you
I
for
want to
it.
thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And
More power to you.
We'll see each
God
other
bless.
online tomorrow.
Well, that's there. God bless both of you.
Okay, take care.